Shabbat Shalom. Today is a very special day. Not just because it's Shabbat, though of course Shabbat is very special. It is also Mavarchim Chodesh, which means that Rosh Chodesh is coming up, and indeed it starts tomorrow. And the Rosh Chodesh, the new month, the new moon that we are celebrating, is Rosh Chodesh Adar, Adar Bet. And that is a month that includes a holiday. Which holiday is coming up? Purim. That's the story of Jewish survival, centering on the brave actions of Queen Esther, who was not only very strong, but also very wise. She possessed a special connection to God. Our ancient rabbis say that she is the very latest and the last in a long line of 7 prophetesses, which is Jewish women prophets. It always brings me special joy, I think, especially as a woman rabbi, to teach of Judaism's particular regard for women, our strength, our knowledge, our wisdom, our skills. The Jewish prophetesses are wonderful paradigms. The first was Sarah, the very first Jewish woman, the Jewish mother of us all, and the first woman leader of the Jews. We have Miriam, who led the people to freedom alongside her brothers. Devorah, the only woman judge and only woman military leader in ancient Jewish history. Hannah, a woman whose piousness was misunderstood in her time, but God favored above all others, and the mother of a prophet as well. Huldah, whose wisdom and knowledge of God's will guided the priests and kings of her time. Abigail, who proved it is not just knowledge that's power, but knowing when to use it that shows true intelligence. And finally, of course, we have Esther, who, like her predecessors, learned that knowing when to speak and when to hold your peace is a skill that one gains over time, and that a little gumption goes a long way too. These are good lessons no matter your gender. Ancient Judaism, in fact, valued women so much that it gave us our very own holiday, and not just once a year, no, every single month. And it's tomorrow, in fact. It is Rosh Chodesh. The new moon, and thus the new Jewish month, was designated to be a 1 or 2 day holiday by our ancient and medieval rabbis for women, to abstain from some forms of work, to have an extra day or 2 off in recognition of the wisdom and faith of the women in Torah times. It's not bad, right? And even older than the Talmud's opinion on women, however, is the Torah's opinion on women. And this very week, wouldn't you know it, we see just what the Torah thinks about women's value. Because this week in the Torah, the Israelites are very busy. They're building the Mishkan. They're building the tabernacle. And they are called to bring offerings: gold, silver, fine yarn, precious wood, exotic stuff, to make it just the best darn tabernacle ever. And this is not the tax part. That's Shabbat Shagalim is also today. This isn't the tax we're talking about. This is for ha'anashim, al-hanashim kol nadiv lev. Men and women, the Torah says, whose hearts moved them, just because they wanted, just because they desired to contribute. It's very unusual, it's very unique that the Torah mentions women specifically, and this points to the specialness of these particular men's and women's contributions. But it doesn't stop there, because the Torah continues to say, Kol isha chochmat lev, all the women who were experts, spun with their own hands purple and blue and crimson yarns and fine linens. Kol hanashim asher nasa liban ota bechochma, and all the women who excelled in those skills. The Torah reiterates the skill and the wisdom and the value of these ancient women, their contributions to the larger society they lived in, and to holy life in particular. I think this makes Judaism pretty incredible. So it's kind of funny, because yesterday was also a holiday. Yesterday was International Women's Day, a day to mark women's achievements in suffrage and note the successes and room for improvement in women's access to things like equal pay, legal rights, medical care. But, as a Jew, we don't need the international community to decide that women have value. We've been celebrating women from the jump. It's in the literal Torah. Women's skills and contributions are so worthy they are mentioned by name in this week's Parsha. Women's faith is so great that the ancient rabbis honor it on a monthly basis. Women's wisdom is so notable. We have women prophetesses, starting in the time of Torah through Judges right up until the book of Esther. Who needs International Women's Day, And it is particularly galling, I would say, on International Women's Day this year. Because modern day International Women's Day was made an internationally recognized holiday in 1975. And do you know who recognized it? Who declared it to be a holiday? The United Nations. That United Nations. The same UN that just 4 days ago acknowledged the October 7th massacre that included the particularly brutal assault and murder of Israeli women and girls, nearly, 5 months after it happened, despite being well documented and freely admitted by the perpetrators. That same UN, again, 5 months later, admitted there may be reasonable grounds to believe that Hamas committed the heinous acts that we here have known about since they occurred. May God avenge them. And in fact, there are all reasonable grounds to believe such violence may be ongoing. That's according to Pramila Patten, who is the UN Special Representative on particular kinds of violence that women experience in conflict. But this shouldn't be a huge surprise that it took so long for her, because she was appointed by the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, who's made his disdain for Israeli and Jewish lives known since the war broke out. It's not a surprise, seeing as the UN's women's rights group, UN Women, took 2 whole months to post a condemnation of the October 7th onslaught, which it then, of course, immediately deleted. Even the New York Times eventually ran an expose on the brutal attacks, and specifically the barbarity perpetrated upon Israeli women. Though, of course, when they finally had that expose out, they were very quickly attacked in the media. And none of this is to say anything of the 19 women, Israeli women, teen girls as young as 18 or 19, young soldiers doing their duty, women in their 30s, a mother with small children, therapists and musicians, veterinarians and stylists, granddaughters of Holocaust survivors, and the elderly, who are still held captive in Gaza now. And we know from the women who survived and were eventually redeemed from captivity, we know what they face being under their Hamas captors' power. And yet, where's the international outrage? Where are the tweets? Where's the demonstrations? What happened to hashtag #MeToo? Hashtag believe all women. Hashtag bring back our girls. And sure, among the 0.2% of the world that's Jewish, we hear those cries, because those are our sisters. But the rest of the world? I don't know. Maybe I'm being ungenerous. Maybe there's a limit on how many characters, how many letters you can use in a hashtag. I don't know how this stuff works, because apparently, for much of the world, when they say hashtag #MeToo, what they really mean is hashtag #MeToo unless you're a Jew. Hashtag believe all women unless they're Israeli. Hashtag bring back our girls, but if they're Jewish, I'm not here to rail against those ideas, I want to point out. I don't think we shouldn't hashtag believe all women. I don't think it's not hashtag #MeToo world. It's not that I don't want to hashtag bring back our girls. I actually think those things are really true. I think they're really important. As a religious Jew, I know they're true because the Torah tells me it's so. The Torah tells me women are just as wise and precious and divine as any of God's children. We see that this week in the Parsha and throughout our ancient history in all of our traditions. It's just that also as a religious Jew, I know, because the Torah tells me it's so, Mishpat echad tiyeh lachem. There is but one law, one standard for all people, and that one cannot purport to care about justice if only some are deserving of justice. That one cannot purport to care about women if the suffering of Jewish or Israeli women leaves them feeling indifferent, and certainly not if it leaves them feeling justified. We Jews Men and women, we deserve better than a world that holds our lives, our blood, so cheaply. We must never forget, as the psalmist sings, Ki noraot nifleti niflaim, we are all awesomely and wonderfully made, even if the rest of the world seems to have forgotten it. We must never, ever stop reminding the world of the 136 hostages still held by Hamas and their ilk in Gaza. I guarantee, as tired as you may become of hearing it, they are more tired of living it. We must speak their names and remember their stories. We must continue to support those in power who support Israel against the sound and fury of what truly is a minority voice, but it is a vicious one that tries to devalue Jewish and Israeli lives. We must continue to remind those in power of our brothers and sisters still held captive in Gaza, the millions of Israelis living under threat and attack from within and without. We must be the voices of the voiceless. For men, and particularly for women, this International Women's Day, this Rosh Chodesh, and always, because that is the Jewish way. Shabbat Shalom.